Hello everyone and welcome to Module 3. The timeline for Module 3 is March the 2nd to the 15th, so right at the tail end of March break here before you have a nice week off from your practicum, time to breathe. This module is designing self-regulated learning for the classroom. So in this module, we're looking at designing the classroom for self-regulated learning. And what that means is, like I said in the last slide, keeping it very practical. So planning purposeful, driven, diversified pedagogical approaches to guide students towards effective self-regulated learning, looking at the practices that you put in place in your classroom, planning for and balancing the performance zone versus the learning zone. And some of you have already tapped into this and I've expressed that in your discussions, but also it comes up a little further in the PowerPoint just to look at what both are. Integrating task relevant supports into the classroom. Learning is key in nurturing self-regulated skills and developing successful self-aware learners. So how can you help your students be better reflection of their learning, monitor their learning, be good at receiving feedback and what to do with it. So these are all kind of practical things that are going to happen in your classroom. And then learning how to create and foster inclusive and safe environments rooted in trusted relationships. Because we all know that if the teacher is very strict on learning and failure is seen as something negative, then that's not going to create that rich environment that you need to foster self-regulated learning. So as you work through this module, I hope that you can come back and look at these student learning outcomes. So as a little bit of a review and a reflect, examining practices that help student develop. Remember, we have cognitive, metacognition, motivational, and behaviors. So what practices were identified in the discussion of Module 2? Exploring the self-regulated learner, being self-aware, goal-directed, and strategic learner. So what kind of learner are we looking to develop? And some of you have already alluded to the fact that they need to take ownership of their learning, to manage their learning, and that's great. And now, so this module brings you into, okay, how do we actually achieve that? And discussing the relation of self-regulated learning to the Ontario Ministry of Education, curriculum policies and guidelines. So what does the ministry say and what is the focus? And if you're not sure, take a look at the report cards and I forget what they're called now, not report cards, but the student learning. Look at those and see what they ask for. So yes, again, I'm repeating what is self-regulated learning because I think we really need to keep repeating it so in our heads, we really understand cognitively what it means. And so it is a strategic pursuit of academic goals, involves control over thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. So I hope some of you now are really starting to say, oh, okay, now I'm seeing the difference between self-regulation and self-regulated learning. And we've already discussed that a little bit in the last PowerPoint for Module 2. But then I love this that I can't remember who included it, but it's very good. The essence of self-regulated learning, empowering students become their learning managers. And so keep that in mind as you're going through this module, because it is about the practical components of how you will really set up that classroom that helps your students become empowered to be their learning managers. So again, next, how can we design that classroom that promotes the 4 components of self-regulated learning? So cognitively, what are you going to put in place for your students to do so that they're reflecting on that? What are you going to do that helps them become motivated, stay motivated? And then what about their behaviors, about learning and curiosity and that kind of thing? And the metacognition, how are you going to help them become better learning managers? Because they're going to need to know, what can I do for myself to help me learn better? And why am I struggling with a certain problem, and etc. So again, I wanted to include this information again, because I think as we're looking at the practical components now, you are working backwards. So if we know some of the serious challenges with self-regulated learning, such as poor task understanding, then how can you, in practice, how can you help students understand the task better? And so there's a difference in saying, I will help students understand the task better, and actually saying, I will help them understand better by doing what? Putting what in place, okay? Because we've got or how are you going to do this? So if the vague goals and plans is a serious challenge for a lot of students, how can you help them create better goals and make plans for them to achieve their goals? So again, working it backwards, looking at the challenges and working back and putting actual practices in place and talking about that. And again, we've covered this a lot throughout all of the self-regulated learning discussions thus far, but in the process of self-regulating, you have to think of self-regulated learning, you have to think control and regulation. So what are students learning to do to control some of their behaviors? For example, when they feel a little bit frustrated, what can you say to them? Or how can they identify those things and help themselves regulate that behavior? And then the goals. So how can you help them? Again, we all have a difficult time creating goals that not relevant, but that will help us achieve them and create that self-efficacy and the motivation to keep going in our learning. We usually create goals that are unachievable, and then it's the negative effects thereafter. And then personal agency. So again, individual drive and determination to achieve the goals together or independently. And that comes with being able to set goals that are achievable, but also when they're not, knowing why and working through the details of why it didn't work. And that's the part of learning from failure. And there was, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting names of people that added these things, but I think it was Emily or Shona, I'm not sure, Shauna, sorry, said, instead of saying I can't, you'd say I can't yet. So I cannot yet do it, but it's coming. So that's the kind of thing we're saying about fostering, right? Those practical, shifting that mindset to foster a sense that students are really thinking about how they can achieve their learning goals. So as you read each of the resources, there's 4 of them for this module, consider how you will design your teaching approach and classroom practices. So again, I say approach because even though we've talked a little bit about, the psychology behind the self-regulated learning, you also need to model that failure is going to be a part of learning. And can you model that for your students? So I made some points here of things to keep in mind as you're reading. Set goals with students to build agency and ownership of learning, the feedback we give for learning and performance, how to support them in reflection and metacognitive functions, how to increase motivation for learning, the classroom we will create, your self-regulated learning, modeling to foster it in your students. And that's very important. I mean, we all know the talk aloud, but so they need to hear, what is your thinking process as you're solving a problem, or you're reading something, or whatever you're doing, or even when you're teaching them and something doesn't go right for you, and how can you reflect on that and thinking out loud. So keep these in mind as you're reading through the resources. So there's 4 resources for this module, and they are found in the modules area of number 3, module 3. As you read the resources, pay particular attention to the learning and performance zone. These have come up in our previous discussions, but I really want you to think about the differences and how you foster them in your classroom. So here we have the differences between the learning zone and the performance zone. So you look at a goal, it's to improve, whereas the performance zone is to do your best, and so on. And you can read through these. So activities is classwork, videos, homework, readings, whereas performance is the exam. So as you're going through things, then you demonstrate your performance of what you've learned, right? But sometimes the parts that goes missing in when you do the performance, then you don't understand or you don't reflect back on why you had the outcome you did, what was a part where, reflecting back on what got you to that point, what didn't get you to that point, what you need to change next. So it's an ongoing, and we know learning is a reflective process, but it's also a circular process. So you never stop learning. So and then the next slide goes into a little bit different take on it. And you see here, the learning is to improve the goal and do as best you can. So it goes into a little bit different. But what I want you to think about is that middle part. So when you're in the middle of learning and performance, so you're learning something, it's the part of the practice, right? So that practice area, you can think about it as that's when, you know, you could give support, or the metacognition is coming in, or how is the learning, what is going on to improve the learning. So that's the kind of middle part when students get an opportunity to practice, and that's where you can set up your classroom. It's like, we're in the practice zone now. We're learning, but we're practicing how to do some things. And then later we're gonna see if we can perform. So that's a good way of kind of approaching it, but everybody has different ways of visualizing how it's gonna look in their classroom. So I'm really interested to see how you are going to visualize this in your classroom in a practical sense. And here we have our Module 3 activity. And what I'd like you to do for this one is to, yes, respond to each of the 4 questions, but really think about the practicality of each one. And then task 2 is to respond to one of your peers by asking a question about their response and providing a follow-up self-regulated learning resource, a strategy resource, okay? So I just want to do a quick overview of assignment number 2. I sent you an example, a couple examples in the email that I sent on Friday. This assignment is due March 22nd, so it's right after the March break. So basically you'll have to plan to get your observations and your student observations completed before March break, so then you can have March break to work on it if you want, or possibly do it before. And of course, you can use the questions that are in the examples. However, it may not suit your context. So be sure that whatever it is that you're observing based on a curriculum outcome or whatever that the teacher is teaching or what you're observing, the questions match what you're asking. And then a critical reflection at the end, which I've included some points here of things that you can ask yourself and answer these questions. So this has always been a very enlightening assignment for the students in the past, because they've really understood what students are actually saying about self-regulated learning and about their learning. So it's a really good activity, I think, or assignment for you to do, to really see the other side from a student's perspective. So enjoy. So I hope you have a great 2 weeks learning how to design self-regulated learning classrooms. I hope you enjoy the readings and working towards your assignment. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out with email, and I will get back to you within 24 hours. Okay, take care and have a great Module 3 and 2 weeks of learning.